You are officially retired, and yet you continue to organize competitions, teach programming, bring young people together, and do everything you can to help them grow.
All of Bulgaria knows about your greatest achievements. One of the top competitors is Rumen Hristov. Everyone remembers Rumen from Shumen, who used to win everywhere. He became second in the world in 2 1/10. He is still ranked 6th in the world in the all-time overall standings. He and his team created a device. The device is called Emerald, and suddenly Emerald turned out to be extremely valuable. At that time, Rumen was awarded by Forbes. He was included in the 30 under 30 ranking, and he won the Medical Professionals Award there. I mentioned Rumen, but I can't help but also point out Rostislav, who for a long time was ranked 5th of all time, but now unfortunately is already 25th. But why unfortunately 25th in the all-time world ranking after so many years? Right now, he works at Google in a pretty high position and continues to develop his career. Just the other day, Danny Koinov finished high school. He's also an exceptional competitor. Last year, he was the leader of the national team, won medals at the International Olympiad, and became Balkan champion. There are many achievements, but these are the top ones. Not everyone can become a champion because there is only one champion, right? What we managed to achieve is genuinely the incredible drive to win, and sometimes that's actually much better, much sweeter, and far more rewarding, more fulfilling than simply winning.
Hello. I'm very happy to have Biserka Yovcheva as my guest again, my first computer science teacher. Hello, Bais.
Hello.
Welcome again as a guest.
I'm glad to be here again.
Could you introduce yourself for the people who haven't seen the previous episode and don't know you?
Yes. My greatest achievements in life are that as a result of my many years of work, I was awarded the title of Professor Honoris Causa by Shumen University. I am an honorary citizen of Shumen, and I hold a doctorate in the methodology of teaching informatics.
Thank you. I've known you since I was 11, I think together with my best friend Vesco, with whom I still work to this day. And right now, we're actually writing, I haven't told you this, we're developing a SaaS system for online commerce, selling educational products, which is what I do, and also selling physical products, since it will be a hybrid system. That's also where I met him well. Actually a bit earlier at school, but later we started coming together to your school, and actually his partner in life is still with him from back then, from that very same school. The school has brought a lot of people together.
That's right.
And I'm making this show to actually introduce young people, and not just young people, but also their parents, to what the A and B school in Shumen is all about. Who's behind it? And why was it created? Could you share a bit more about what life is like for a teacher and what your mission actually is? Why, after so many years, 7 now, when you are officially retired, you still continue to organize competitions, teach programming, bring young people together, and do everything you can to help them grow?
To do this, you have to love your job. And this particular job requires you to love the children as well. I love both, and I truly do it with great passion. So we founded the school together with Professor Anton Milov, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But back then, the two of us started it together. But the decision to create the school was made at Kaspichan train station while we were having coffee, waiting for the connection between two trains. We were coming back from the winter math and informatics competitions in Ruse.
What year was that?
1998. We were coming back from the competition, and the whole way we talked about how important the connection between mathematics and informatics is. At the cafe in the Kaspichan train station, We continued the same conversation, and suddenly the realization came how wonderful it would be if the two of us joined forces and started teaching mathematics and informatics together in sync. And so, quite naturally, the idea came to start our own school. No sooner said than done. Of course, I needed computers. For him, it was easier. I spoke with a friend and former classmate who promised me some money. She said, with pleasure. She gave me her phone number, but a week later I realized I had lost it, so I had to manage on my own. And this was the first time I involved a parent of one of my students. It turned out that the lady worked at DSK, which at the time was the only bank that provided financing, that gave out any kind of loans. All the others were rather dubious back in 1998. And she taught me how we could trick the bank so that they would grant me, at that time, 3 million leva. That was enough to buy 3 computers.
3 million leva for 3 computers. And they must have been cheap.
Well, after a few months with the denomination, that became 3,000. So everything ended with those 3 million. The 4th computer was my home one, and since I had decided to start a group of 10 kids, I needed a 5th. Since I was buying the computers from Elenko Computers at the time, Elenko embraced the idea and decided to give me a computer on credit, but also found a way for me to earn the money to pay for it. He suggested that I teach a basic computer literacy course at the tile factory in Isperich. It was very interesting because in order to earn that money, I would get up every morning at 6 o'clock, get into a taxi, and it would take me to Isperich. To be fair, they also paid for the taxi. There I had classes with 2 groups, each for 3 academic hours. We would finish around 12:30, after which the taxi would pick me up and race me back to Shumen, where at 1:15 I would start my class at the university. At 5 o'clock, after finishing my classes, I would rush to the school building and teach the evening course for adults. Many people from Shumen have attended these courses. The evening course for adults would finish around 8:30. After that, I would clean the office for the next day and we would get home around 10. Then we would have dinner and so on. This routine went on for 3 months. If someone asked me to do that now, I wouldn't do it. By the way, that was on weekdays. On holidays, I had classes from 8 to 8 with the kids, but that was just the beginning.
You took over the school later, where it is now.
It's worth telling this story when Professor Molov and I set out to actually establish the school. One of the things we had to do was find a place where we could hold the classes. And this part was very interesting because besides that, I also needed a license to conduct computer literacy courses, which were extremely popular at the time. Back then, basically every working person had to take a computer literacy course. And in order to run these courses, I needed a license to conduct them. So Molo and I are walking around the city center looking for buildings, and we run into our friend. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us either. Professor Gelyazov from the military academy, he was happy to see us. And so he asked, "What are you doing?" Well, we tell him we're looking for a hall for a school that will focus on programming education and running computer training courses. At that point, he says, "You know, I have such a hall and a license for training, but I have no one to teach the courses." In that moment, everything was decided, and the hall he had, well, calling it a hall is a bit of an exaggeration. It was a relatively small room above what was then the Russian bookstore at Tulesh Koshut. And what was even better was that it was rented from the municipality. In other words, we started as if by magic. The school was created as if by magic. Everything I wanted to do suddenly just happened as if by magic. I don't know how. To this day, it makes me think that I really was meant to create this school, and everything was helping me to make it happen. No matter what, despite all the troubles and all the difficulties I faced, things always happened as if by magic and kept going that way.
I don't know if it's a secret. It's not a secret until recently. She was still paying it off.
Until recently, I was still paying off the new building for the school. We had to buy a new building for the school after the space we were using became too small for the school very quickly. We had to move to a bigger place, then to another even bigger one, but we were always renting. And every time the people who rented to us would suddenly decide that we were causing too much trouble, making too much noise, and that they couldn't rent to us anymore. And we were literally chased out from everywhere every time. And after yet another time when we couldn't stay as tenants, maybe a lot of people remember that's when it started above the old courthouse, in the building of the old courthouse on Alec Konstantinov Street, next to the Russian one.
Yes.
So after we had to leave from there, I calculated how much rent I had paid and how many renovations we had done in all those buildings we were in. And suddenly I decided that if this building was mine, everything would remain for the future and simply no one would be able to make me leave. And that's when we decided to take out a loan. It was a crazy story. We were named the deal of the year by the agency that sold us the house, but we bought the house and started to. I created work in it and began paying it off. I know how I managed, but this year in September, we finished paying it off.
So it took about 20 years to pay it off.
Yes, 20 years and a few months.
Wonderful. Well, it's easy to be a teacher in Bulgaria, right?
Yes.
Education has a lot of money.
If someone decides they want to make money from education, that won't be someone who will actually educate the children. You can't make money from education. And you give it your all. For now, Bulgarians aren't used to paying for education. And another thing is, there's this concept called a socially acceptable price. And sometimes even if someone wants to pay, they simply can't afford it socially. And for that reason, someone who works in education like me can't set the price that is actually necessary to make a living. It turns out that almost always I have to subsidize this education myself. And it's a good thing that in recent years I was given a large pension, and now I'm very happy because this pension goes entirely to the school.
I can't help but ask you, I don't know if it's appropriate, but what is the current monthly fee for a student at the school?
One of the things I did over the years was to remove the monthly fee.
So now it's per visit?
No, it's more
Per semester?
much longer because it's more like per term. Because I noticed that when I set a monthly fee, there are people who start calculating the fee per hour and act as if their children are attending a movie screening. But the work at the school is a process. I'm not just conducting a single lesson. It's part of the overall education. And if a child misses a class, that doesn't mean they shouldn't pay for that class. Because in practice, if they weren't present when I explained something important, afterwards I have to spend extra time explaining it to them individually so they can keep up with the group. That's why our fee is set for the entire term. Anyone who wishes can also pay for the whole year.
Yes, so what is the annual fee then, if it's not a secret?
The annual fee at the moment is 1,140 leva. That was for this academic year. The accounting department told me that it will most likely be slightly adjusted for the next year. And another thing I like to mention is that after my credit swelled to a six-figure amount, and there was already a danger that the first digit would become a two, the accounting department told me, sorry, a six-figure amount. And the accounting department told me that from now on I shouldn't deal with money anymore. They told me to mind my own business and that I would no longer be in charge of the school's finances, since I clearly don't understand anything about it. So I'm expecting the new calculation of the fees any moment now, but it won't be anything too drastic. The most it might go up is by 40 or 50 leva.
That's 6 figures per year, right? Or per month?
I'm talking about loans. When I reach the six-figure amount in loans,
But is that a monthly payment or yearly?
yearly.
Okay.
No, in total.
Yeah, but
In total.
per year.
In total. No.
So you're talking about when you took out loans, meaning when you bought the school there all, the equipment, you had a six-figure amount to pay back?
Exactly.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so how do you deal with a few phenomena? I can't help but ask you, the first phenomenon is a bit older, and it's called, let's say, Udemy and all sorts of Bulgarian alternatives. I won't list them all, where there are tons of super cheap programming courses, free programming courses, foreign courses for $10. Absolutely. There are also code academies where, apart from registration, you don't need anything else. How do you deal with that? Aren't there a lot of parents who say, well, why should my child go somewhere to learn programming when they can just sit at home, click around, and learn on some website? They know English.
With free courses such as those found online, I often observe and notice that truly good and consistent results are not always achieved. What often happens is that someone who has attended free courses try to participate in competitions or something like that. Suddenly their parent brings them to me and says, this is as far as we got. We can't manage on our own anymore. But this is the case if the children decide to pursue something more seriously. What ends up happening after these free courses is months of work to eliminate bad habits, because during training it really needs to be individually tailored. Each person has their own way of perceiving things and their own needs. And I need to get to know every person I teach so I can give them attention where it's needed. In our school, the groups have no more than 10 people. Not to mention, we even have groups of 5. Even when it was COVID and everyone switched to online learning, after we spent 2.5 months online, I realized that the brilliant things I was telling the kids hadn't been remembered at all. We organized ourselves, split the groups into 5 people each, and worked twice or even 3 times as much just so we could have in-person classes to hold our lessons face-to-face. So you can't rely on running some online courses and expect them to be worth nothing. And with these courses, someone might pick them up, listen through them, and learn things. It's true. There are motivated people who might be able to do that. There are also brilliant people who can do it. But an average child who wants to learn programming wouldn't be able to do anything with these things. And I remember very well how at the school where I was explaining how much our courses cost and so on, a parent stood up and said, for so much money, what exactly are you going to teach the children? I'll just get a university student, and for 2 leva an hour, he'll teach my child. And then another parent said, well, look, you can go and buy an old, completely broken down car for 500 or 600 leva. Or you can go and buy a Mercedes. Right now, you're being offered a brand new, expensive car. You can decide whether to drive this one or that one. It's your choice. And this was said by parents. Most parents who understand what it's about prefer to enroll their children in the school. I conducted an experiment. I found people to finance the training. The current mayor of Sofia, from his own company, they financed the training, and I had to create a free group. That was the first group in the school that fell apart the following year. For the first time, I made no distinction in teaching, but this group was free of charge.
I don't know when the viewers will be watching this material. People might watch it even a year from now. It will stay on the internet. But back when I started organizing gatherings, I was teaching online commerce. And I decided to make the first ones free. And of course, for them to be free, I had to pay for the venue, coffee, cookies, and water for everyone. I say I don't know when they'll watch it, because this month, let's say on June 28th, there's such an event in Varna, but it's no longer free. And as I mentioned, it costs exactly as much as a movie ticket. In other words, we haven't made it very expensive. The idea is to avoid having people come who aren't willing to pay for it. Because what happens with free events? While someone who has come from the other end of Bulgaria is trying to teach them something this case, for example, a professor and a doctor specializing in finance will be coming, and it's disrespectful. But that's what happens when someone is speaking and the people haven't paid anything. Not only do they not listen to him, but people in the back are chatting. And very often you might get people who just happen to be passing by, know there's an event going on, come in and start munching on chips and cracking open a beer. Up until 2 months ago, I used to offer free trainings. As you know, I work with artificial intelligence, and I had launched a completely free training course on artificial intelligence with quite a few modules, practical lessons, all recorded and edited, which wasn't free for me. Because first I invested my time, then I paid my team, and I decided to randomly call some people. Since several thousand people signed up, I decided to randomly call 100 people. Out of those 100 people, 98 hadn't even opened IT, in other words. They had registered, but hadn't watched it, so I called them to see what their feedback was. Well, there was no feedback. The truth is, when someone doesn't pay for something, they don't engage with it at all. And this is also true for gifted books, by the way. 99% of gifted books never get read, not because they're not suitable, but because people haven't paid for them. Somehow, people just tend to skip over these things. So my experience is pretty much the same as yours. Free doesn't work. But since you mentioned the Mercedes and the old car, can you tell me what the level of the Shumen students from the Heyman school is nowadays? I know what the level was like 25 years ago. Back then, we were constantly struggling with. In Sofia, there were 40 teams. In Shumen, there was just one. And when we went, we were usually either first or second. I'm talking only about Sofia. These people were from all over Bulgaria. How is it now?
Are you talking about the student competitions back then?
Yes.
And you were in second place. As for the school competitions, we were always first. Until the moment when one of your classmates, a bit older than you from the school, went.
No one ever reads these books. Not because they're not meant for them, but because they haven't paid for them. Somehow, people just tend to skip over these things. So my experience is pretty much the same as yours. Free things don't work. But since you mentioned the Mercedes and the old car, can you tell me what the level of the Shumen graduates from the A and B school is? Back in the day, 25 years ago, I know what the level was. Back then, we were constantly competing with. In Sofia, there were 40 teams. In Shumen, there was just one. And when we went, we were usually either in first or second place. I'm talking only about Sofia. And you traveled all over Bulgaria. How is it now?
Are you talking about the student competitions from back then?
Yes, yes.
And you were in second place? As for the school competitions, we were always first. Until the moment when one of your classmates who was a bit older than you from the school went to Sofia and together with another student from Varna, who also used to come to the school for a while, established an Olympiad school in Sofia, a school specifically for talented students, which was carefully and thoughtfully modeled after the well-known A and B school. And from that moment on, the people from Sofia started beating us. Yes, there was also another moment a little before that, but back then they still weren't beating us. A little before that, I published the booklet First Steps in Programming. And I already mentioned the free funding. Still, I will have to mention the name of the company. It no longer exists. That was the Telerik Kids Academy. I created the Telerik Kids Academy, which was funded by the company Telerik at the time, and this training. Actually, I wasn't just teaching the children. I was mostly training their teachers on how to conduct the children's education. Literally every week, I would send all the teachers the lessons and assignments that needed to be solved. And every month, I organized national assessment competitions. After the competitions, I would do an analysis. Something like, hey, over there in Varna, I noticed that you can't, that the kids are struggling with this problem. Please, next month, pay special attention to it. Here are some exercises. These will help you fix things.
Is this related in any way to Svetlin Nakov from Soft Uni? Because Telerik, I directly associated with him.
When we created the Telerik Kids Academy, we did it together with Svetlin.
So you were working together back then?
We worked together back then.
I think it was impossible to do anything with Telerik at that time without him.
At that time, yes.
Then he split off, sold it, or something like that happened with the business, and it became Soft Uni.
Although we were also working with Vasil Tertsev back then, the well-known.
Weren't those Telerik courses free?
Yes, exactly. Those courses were funded by Telerik.
Yes. So they were free for the students so that they could produce skilled professionals in the future. Maybe there was some kind of business logic behind it?
Well, I want to say something about that funding. Yes, they did fund it. But there's a joke. I don't know what kind of people will be watching us, but still. They asked a prostitute, well, not exactly, let's say a beautiful girl, for example, do you have sex for love or for money? To which she smiled and said, it must be for love 50 leva. Is that even money? So basically, Telerik did fund it, but the funding, for example, wasn't enough. In fact, they only covered the instructor's fee. Everything else had to be found elsewhere. For example, a school would provide a computer lab, and Telerik would pay the instructor's fee, and of course they paid me some fee as well. But after a while, a manager was appointed there to be in charge of the Children's Academy, and he wanted us to record our lessons with the kids, thinking that this way the Children's Academy could continue without teachers. Honestly, I can't record my lesson. A lesson for 4th grade today at 11 a.m. is completely different from the 4th grade lesson I'll teach at 3 p.m., even though both are for the same grade level. The content, activities, and the way I approach teaching can vary significantly depending on the time of day and the needs of the students in each class. It's simply because the children are different. I react in the moment and things, they just can't be the same when recorded on video, especially when it comes to young children. What's more, these children can't even concentrate, let alone if you put them in front of a video and expect them to watch and learn. There's just no way that would work.
I've even made separate videos, for example, on my other channel, where I thoroughly explain in detail the difference between information and education. And for sure, many people don't understand that education is a process that has nothing to do with just information.
Yes.
So I can give an example since we're talking about children with little kids. No matter how much you explain to a child that something is hot, you give them the information, you say, it burns, it hurts, and all sorts of other things. But the only way for them to really learn is through experience. So If the information is it's hot over there, then, well, education is when the child actually touches the iron. And I've even seen many mothers who try to explain. Just recently, I even saw a mother explaining to her 2-year-old son who was trying to touch the iron while she was ironing. In the end, she literally let him burn himself, and he won't go near it the second time. So one is information, which we often hear but don't understand, and the other is education, which we experience and go through ourselves. I remember, and now I'll quote, I'm sure you still use this to this day. I can bet that a programmer becomes a programmer when they've solved 100 problems.
Yes.
So no matter how much we watch someone drive, if we don't sit down and drive 100 kilometers ourselves, let's say, we can't actually drive that car still at 50 times and so on. No matter how much we watch someone programming in videos and so on, if we don't sit down and write 100 algorithms, solve 100 problems that actually produce the correct result, then we can't program. When we face it for the first time, we won't be able to apply it, no matter how much we've watched. So in this context, speaking about that most people don't distinguish between education and information. Actually, you mentioned videos and that they don't work well. But is there actually a difference in the focus of children between when I was a child 25 years ago, when we were in a group, and now a group today? Do you think there's a difference in their focus?
Yes, nowadays it's much harder for them to focus. With these short videos they watch online, they're used to always getting a large amount of information in a very short time. But what doesn't happen is thinking there's no thinking involved. I'm especially a strong opponent of innovative methods, because usually what is meant by innovation is presenting the material to children in a pre-chewed form. Everything is drawn out and done for them, and there's no thinking left for them to do. It stifles the development of imagination. And in fact, a person's intellect is truly built and developed over time through the remarkable power of imagination. The more we leave it to the children to imagine, to really think it through, to use their imagination and logical connections, the more they actually learn and grow as individuals. If we just give them everything ready-made, they look at it, it becomes clear to them in the moment, and then literally forget it after a few days. As I mentioned a little earlier about online learning.
And another such problem is that they remember the information, like just as I gave an example during your previous visit, we have it. We have no idea how it works, but we know that the function is called in this way, yet we don't know what's inside that function. We can't explain it to ourselves, and accordingly, another problem arises. Later on, we can't use it properly because we don't know how it works.
Yes.
And as it's often said, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to use this expression here, but you can kill a fly both with a sledgehammer and with a newspaper.
Exactly.
So if you don't know which tool to use, you might end up using a completely inappropriate one, and maybe you'll still achieve some kind of result. Very often, it turns out, like the database of my old website, which I'm currently replacing because of people who are learning to program, we ended up with a database that's 26 gigabytes. We can imagine what we're talking about. That's because if someone who actually knew what they were doing had built it, maybe it would have been 30 megabytes.
Well, I've had cases where people come to me and ask, okay, but I called the function 10,000 times. Why is it slow? They seem genuinely puzzled, wondering why their code isn't performing as quickly as they expected, even though they're just repeating the same function over and over again in their program.
It's just one function. I only wrote a single line. But what's inside? How long does a single line take to execute? Of course, sometimes there's an endless loop. So in that regard, do you think that nothing can replace live in-person education? And even a live meeting over a monitor can that really replace an in-person meeting? Because I myself stopped holding live events 5 years ago due to the virus situation. And this month, I'm bringing them back precisely because I missed that real in-person interaction. You can't get that with artificial intelligence or with people on camera or with a phone conversation. It's just not the same. In other words, if you sit across from me, it's nothing like you being at home on your laptop right now.
That's true.
It's not that I couldn't have invited you via laptop, but that's why I insist on having a studio. I can always do my podcast online, and there wouldn't be a need for so many expenses. But it's the live connection that makes people human. There's no way to replace that. But still, is there any place for online learning?
If it's necessary, there is.
If it's necessary.
Because in my school, there are children enrolled from Haskovo, Razgrad, Burgas, Targovište, Silistra, Dobrik, and Sofia. These children can't come twice a week for 2 class periods. So for much of the time, we simply include them online. But when they attend our classes, they attend them online. At that moment, they can see and hear me, as well as what their classmates are saying. If something isn't clear to them, they can ask directly. And despite everything, the best part for them comes when we do intensive preparation right before a competition, and they can come and spend the whole week here in person. So there is a way, but still nothing beats being here in person.
Earlier, you mentioned that there's supposedly no money in education, but actually, doesn't this phenomenon mainly come from the fact that many people simply don't see the point in getting an education? Since, yes, IT specialists do earn high salaries, that's a well-known fact. They will most likely decrease by a significant percentage because of artificial intelligence, since most of them are at a very low level. But those who remain will probably start earning even higher salaries. That's almost certainly the case. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
Let's say half of them will remain, but they will be earning even higher salaries. But on the other hand, becoming a high-level IT specialist,
It takes a lot of hard work.
yes, I regularly communicate with programmers at a very high level, and one of them is Vesco, with whom I'm currently developing this system, the AS system. For example, he said that so far he hasn't encountered a single artificial intelligence that can provide a good solution, because, and I always tell him this, Vesco, let's say if AI is at the average human level, and the average human level is 5 out of 10, with 10 being the absolute highest, then you've reached 9.5, 9.8 out of 10. And if it's at 5 out of 10, there's no way it can be a specialist like you. It can help someone who's just starting out, someone who's at level 2, level 3.
And teach them bad habits.
Yes, he might hallucinate something that later you'll have to figure out how to explain isn't true, but there's no way he can reach that high expert level, because he simply can't be an expert, at least at this moment, at this stage. Now, if someone is watching this video 10 years from now, forgive me if by then it does everything on its own, but for now, we still don't have that.
That's right.
We have artificial intelligence that doesn't work unnaturally, right? And I think that people don't want to invest their money in education, because I don't believe that 1,000 leva is a high fee. Not because I don't respect 1,000 leva as an amount, but, excuse me, I was recently in Sofia and wanted to get a gym membership. They only had an annual membership, no monthly option, annual membership that was more expensive than your yearly tuition. I'm saying this honestly from the heart. In the end, I got a card for 200 leva per month, because if you're not a club member, it's 200 leva. And it was much cheaper, because I was only in Sofia for a month. It was much cheaper than paying the membership fee, getting signed up, then having to stay for at least 3 months, and then canceling my membership. When I added it all up, I would have ended up paying 600 leva just to go for 1 month. So a single visit was 50 or 60 leva, something like that. And at one point I thought about it and decided, well, I'll pay 200, right? Because otherwise I'd only come 4 times in a month, which isn't worth it. And paying for 5 months and coming just once also isn't worth it. So I don't think the training is expensive. If a gym...
For my 120 hours per year, that's no more than 10 leva per hour.
That's what I mean. At an average gym in the bigger cities, they charge you 20 or 30 leva without anyone actually working with you. You just wander around the equipment and then leave. So to me, it doesn't seem expensive. It's just that people aren't willing to pay for it because it requires a lot of effort. Maybe if you just sold the training by saying that it actually works almost instantly and you can really do it from home in just 2 hours and then you start making money the very next month, maybe that would work.
Yes, but what we do just can't be done quickly. And I don't want to lie to anyone. I always just say that this is achieved with an incredible amount of hard work. To become a good programmer, you have to be ready to put in that effort. There's no way around it.
When you say a good programmer, I can't help but ask you, what's the difference between a competitive programmer, the one who goes to competitions and racks up points, and a real programmer, the kind we know, someone who's an actual programmer working at an average company? The main difference is between someone who has truly studied programming competitively. There's a huge difference there. I just want you to explain it compared to someone who has taken 5 courses somewhere, each lasting about 3 weeks, read a bit at home somewhere, it doesn't matter where, and that's it.
I can give a simple example with my daughter. When she started working at the company and I gave her a task that she was supposed to complete in a week, it took her just 1 day. I even started explaining to her that she needs to be careful with this, because if she keeps finishing her work for a week in just one day, people will start looking at her sideways since others can't work at that pace. That's one thing. Since you have been taught to program under pressure for 5 hours, you have to solve 3 problems, and they are serious ones. Another interesting phenomenon is that people who've done competitive programming always manage to write very clean and efficient code. No matter how much people try to tell me that at some point they start writing differently, especially when they're in a hurry, even then, they still write clean and efficient code.
If you have such a well-established habit, that's simply not true. I don't know a single competitor who does that.
That's right.
There just isn't one. I'll give an example with Vesco. Sometimes he comes up with incredible, I'm sure he'll probably watch this show incredible conclusions. I managed to bring it down. And until now, it was loading in 7 milliseconds. Now it loads in 6. And I ask him, okay, who the hell besides you is ever going to notice that 1 millisecond?
For him, that's enough.
He notices it. Yes, he notices it. And when the person gets used to working like that, at some point, when he creates a system that's used by, let's say, several hundred factories, like it is now with several tens of thousands of employees, and it turns out that this system runs on a server for peanuts instead of a $10,000 per month server, simply because it's made so efficiently.
Because that millisecond matters.
If you have 100,000 requests, that 1 millisecond makes quite a difference.
Exactly. And the third phenomenon that can be observed. These people spot all kinds of errors just very quickly, very accurately, and they fix them literally on the spot. These are people who, if you tell them there's a bug somewhere, can find it for you. They can always track it down and identify it for you. We had reached a certain problem. I know it existed in the company. The problem was with during echo cancellation, for example, with a system that was being developed nowadays. These systems are very popular. Conference call systems, but this was quite a considerable number of years ago, as you might imagine. Back when conference calls weren't so modern and there weren't so many communication programs, this was a paid program. And echo cancellation is, for example, when you call into a TV show and they tell you, turn off your phone so we can talk without interruptions, and turn off your TV as well. Well, this problem is easily solved by a program from Adobe, and it was purchased accordingly. Adobe constantly updates their products, and after one of their updates, the system suddenly stopped working and an error appeared. However, no one connected this error to the Adobe update. They started looking for the source of the error. This time it took a long time. The error was being investigated for a whole week. Until at one point, one of the team members thought to ask when the error had first appeared. And then it became clear that it happened after the latest Adobe update. It turned out that the error was in the Adobe update, not in this system. Only a true competitor could discover something like that, because in order to solve their problems within 5 hours, they have to be able to find their own mistakes.
Can you tell me a bit more about the upcoming eJOI event? Because we've already discussed these things, but someone might be watching our video for the first time.
The upcoming event is the European Junior Olympiad in Informatics, which was established in Bulgaria in 2017. For the 9th time, it will be held again in Bulgaria, in Shumen, and I hope that with the experience we have in organizing competitions, since our school was the first organizer of the Autumn Informatics Tournament, which was established in 2001, and at that time there were no autumn tournaments in any subject. There were winter math competitions, spring competitions, but in the autumn there were no competitions at all. I don't know why, but it seemed very necessary to me to have an assessment of knowledge at the beginning of the school year, to see where the children stand so that they can make a plan for the year. And that's when we created the first competition. So we have plenty of experience. After that, competitions in mathematics, physics, and so on were established. This competition became international. We started organizing it. This year, it was held for the 16th time, And I hope that we will also be able to successfully organize the European Youth Olympiad this year.
How can people who want to support, besides sharing the video, also support it financially? Since I know that you have secured a large part of the funds, but you still can't complete the budget, as there are 30 countries expected to come with 6 people per team, someone has to pay for those days that fall during this period.
For accommodation, food.
Yes, our team will participate as volunteers, but still. Last time we only found a photographer shortly before the event, but even so.
We also have a website for the European Youth Olympiad. I hope that we will share it.
We'll definitely put it as the first link in the description, and viewers will see it on the screen while we talk.
We will have it. There, it is explained how you can donate. We also have an association where the money is deposited so that it can be spent in a sufficiently transparent manner. And we will put the bill on the association. There is also a short video that presents the Olympiad. I'll send you the link and we can include it in the competition.
When people look at the website, they will also see the packages and what they actually get. Because with this package, you will advertise them in 30 or 40 countries, depending on how many participate.
That's pretty much how it works, yes.
All right. Can you tell me a bit more about spiral learning and how it is applied in the school?
Spiral learning is actually my own discovery. And in practice, you are a victim of this approach. In fact, it was actually your age group, that is, people who are around your age, who were, in fact, the very first ones that I ever experimented with this particular approach on when I was first trying it out. And actually, like every discovery, it's something extremely simple. Just think about it. When you start learning mathematics in first grade, they don't tell you about Peano's axioms, the theory of integers, or various other axioms and proofs. Instead, they simply say, here is one apple, this is the number 1, 2 apples, the number 2. And the most interesting thing is that with each subsequent step, you solve essentially the same types of problems. For example, when you learn about numbers up to 10, Ivancho had 3 apples, Marika had 2. How many do they have together? When you start learning about 100, well, we calculate differently. Ivancho had 25 apples, Marika had 35, and so on. Overall, the problems are very similar, but no one starts teaching children difficult things right from the very beginning. How was programming taught up until the point when I perhaps made my publications? Well, someone would come in and say, now I'm going to teach you how to program. But the thing is, programming is done in a programming language, and we have to learn it. Within 2 or 3 weeks, they dump the entire programming language on the students. And then they say, now write programs. And at some point, it turns out that no one can actually write any program. The idea of the spiral approach is to start learning programming step by step, and at every stage, we solve simple problems using what we've learned so far.
Hasn't it always been like that? Because I never studied programming before I actually learned it.
Well, no, it hasn't always been like that. It's interesting to see the reaction of each of my students. No, it wasn't like that. And actually,
I remember that we learned Hello World first. Well, that's obvious. But the point is that after that, if you remember, I showed you the basic operators that only input, output, and calculate something. And for 4 or 5 sessions, we just inputted, outputted, and calculated things until you understood, accepted, and moved on. But wasn't it like that before as well?
no,
Wasn't it, for example, one lecture or one class where you only learn sin, then another with count, then another for defining a variable?
no. Everything was a mess.
All at once?
In one class, they give you this. In the next class, they introduce you to the conditional operator. In the third class, loop operators, and in the fourth, arrays, and you're done. Now go program. And the other thing is, it was exactly with your groups that I started taking my first steps with the spiral approach, because you taught me that there's a difference between one task and another. Now, I'm going to mention Miroslava because she'll probably be watching me. She was the person who, for the first time, made me stop and think, because after I had taught you one type of problem in class and then gave what I thought were almost the same problems on the test, it turned out that the problem where children throw a ball a certain distance and you have to determine who threw it the farthest is very different from the problem where you're given points on a plane with their coordinates and you have to find the one farthest from the origin of the coordinate system. But for a fifth grade child, it turned out that these are fundamentally different problems. That's when I realized why learning programming is difficult. Because when you study mathematics, the hardest problems are the ones with parameters. Do you remember parametric equations? But what is programming really? Everything there is parameterized. We don't work with numbers there. We work with letters. And that's exactly what's very hard for a child in fourth or fifth grade to understand, because the level of abstraction they can handle at that stage of development is much lower than what others might be able to. Later on, it turned out that the same approach works perfectly with university students as well, not just with school children. And so,
Even though they're older, their level of abstraction isn't very high.
no, the spiral approach works very well even with older people. Of course, it allows for faster comprehension. This way, you can teach a student to program with more focused hours during the semester. But again, by applying the spiral approach, because there's a difference between more precisely in this kind of training, there's no difference whether you're finding the largest of 3 numbers or the largest of n numbers. This is done in the same way, using the same algorithm. That is, of course, if the instructor knows this and teaches it that way. And then after we found the largest of 3 numbers, and then the largest of n consecutively entered numbers, suddenly we have to find the longest among 50 words. It turns out these are things that have already been accumulated over time and are much easier to do. And so,
If I understood you correctly, people won't realize that this is actually the same task. When we talk about the longest word and the largest number,
yes, but they will see the algorithm which I have already embedded over time.
otherwise they won't make the connection.
They won't make it.
And then the child will go outside and say, I won't be able to do it. I couldn't solve the problem because we haven't learned about the longest word. We've only learned about the largest number.
Yes, but if this is built into the whole learning process, and we've been gradually solving things this way, then when we start learning about the longest word, we'll specifically study it again. But we'll also remind them that we're using that same algorithm. But if I don't do that, and for example, I explain to them how to find the largest number and give it to them without having solved problems about the longest words, they won't be able to handle it. And it's important for this to be repeated again in the next step of the learning process. And so it becomes a kind of spiral repetition of the same things. Only at each moment, the level of knowledge increases.
What else sets school A and B apart from the other schools in the country? I say what else because obviously this is an approach you use and maybe it's used elsewhere too. As you mentioned, some of your students have already started their own schools and most likely they are working according to your methodology.
This approach is already being used in a large number of schools around the world. For this very approach, I have already received congratulations from many of my colleagues. I was very surprised when I found out that this approach is highly valued by my guru in informatics, in competitive informatics. This is one of the greatest coaches in the world, Andrei Stankovic, who, as a student, was a world champion several times, and as the leader of his university team, has been a world champion 10 times. But it turned out that this person values this teaching approach extremely highly. And when it comes to introductory training, he's already applying it. And I'll give one more example with the Serbian programming team. In 2012, when I first met their coach, they couldn't win a medal. While in our previous competition, I mentioned that at one event, half of our kids won medals. So back then, the Serbians didn't win a medal. Last year, the Serbians beat us at the International Olympiad, and now they're using our approach. As for school A and B, that's about the training. At the moment, there's no difference in the approach. Everyone is working according to my methodology. And that's what I said. The moment I made my methodology public, all of Bulgaria started beating Shumen. But what's important, and now, if you think about it, you'll realize that this is exactly what's most important in our school. We are a team of leaders, children and parents, and we are all one team, guided by a single goal: to teach the children and help them achieve more and more success in their knowledge. The greatest friendships that have been formed were created at the school, and to this day I see how they work all over the world and somehow manage to arrange to meet up somewhere. And I receive a photo from that meeting. This is one of the sweetest things, even to this day. On my birthday, on December 26, 50-60, sometimes up to 100 people gather each, coming from somewhere to see their friends and share how far they've come. And the younger ones eagerly await this gathering so they can see, wow, is that really Rumen Hristov? Yes, that's him. These are people they idolize, and suddenly they have the chance to see them in person. This is our school where the teachers are not just instructors and educators. They're friends. They're the coaches who know more, and you can always ask them anything. Sometimes they don't even know more. There are times when the top athletes know more than I do, but we still keep working as a team and achieving success.
How many children have gone through the school so far? Do you have any statistics?
I think in terms of certificates, we've already reached about 4,000 or 5,000, honestly.
4,000 or 5,000?
Yes, certificates, it's true. We issue certificates every year, each year. And we have people who have studied at the school for 11 years, from 2nd to 12th grade, but there are only a few of them. So you could say that about 2,000 children have gone through the school over these years.
2,000? Wow.
Well, try going to a job interview in Sofia. The chances of running into an interviewer from the school are very high. There are many cases when someone writes to me in some chat and says, hey, do you know this person? And I usually reply, yes, they're from the school. Then they say, I knew it. You can see the spark in the eyes of someone from the school. So that special spark in the eyes is always there. And I'm sure that when you meet somewhere, even unexpectedly, you just recognize each other almost instantly. Something draws you together.
What are the biggest successes that come to mind? Obviously, you can't list them all now out of 2,000 people. If there have been 500 medalists, there's no way you can name them all right now. If I mention the biggest ones, immediately someone who was your student will say, see, they didn't mention me. But just off the top of your head, tell us about the biggest ones. I know that some won awards, some went to MIT, some started working at Google, others at Microsoft, at Gameloft, I could list them all day. Some created their own platforms, others launched their own projects, which are now worth several hundred million. I know people like that from the school, but what comes to your mind? Because if let's say there were 2,000 of us, I know barely.
10, 15, okay, 50?
5%, maybe 10% at most. I might have seen 10 know 5, but 100% of them, and you definitely know about bigger achievements.
Still, the biggest achievements are known by all of Bulgaria. One of the top competitors is Rumen Hristov. Everyone remembers Rumen from Shumen, who used to win everywhere. He became second in the world in 2010. He is still ranked 6th in the world in the all-time overall standings. And right now, he and his team have created a device. The device is called Emerald. This is a device that is installed in the home of a person who needs it, for example, an elderly or ill person. This device is able to record all the vital signs of the person living in the home without them having to wear it. It is simply installed in the residence. In addition, it monitors the person's position, for example, where they are lying down, what they are doing. It keeps track of the entire house. And if, for instance, the person is lying not in their bed, but on the floor, that means something is wrong. The vital signs are immediately checked, and the device alerts the appropriate person. If it detects an increase in smoke in the room, it will again alert the appropriate person. This device turned out to be extremely sought after, and while initially only pharmacists were interested in using it, suddenly we found ourselves in a pandemic, and then sick people had to decide to isolate themselves at home. And suddenly, Emerald became extremely valuable. That's when Rumen was awarded by Forbes. He was included in the 30 under 30 ranking, and he won the Medical Professionals Award there with his device. At the moment, his company has really surpassed 1 million and continues to grow. After all, I mentioned Rumen, but I can't help but also point out Rustislav, who for a long time was 5th of all time, but now, unfortunately, is already 25th. But why, unfortunately? 25th in the all-time world ranking after so many years. Right now, he works at Google in a pretty high position and continues to develop his career. And just the other day, Danny Koinov successfully finished his education. Specifically, he completed his secondary education, marking an important milestone in his life. He's also an exceptional competitor. Last year, he was the leader of the national team, winning medals at the International Olympiad. He became the Balkan champion. There are many achievements, but these are the top ones. Not everyone can become a champion because there is only one champion, right? But what we managed to achieve is the drive for victory. And sometimes that's much better. It's nicer, much sweeter than just winning. So
Everyone becomes a champion in their own life. In the end,
yes.
You don't have to beat everyone to be...
Yes, but
You can do things well without being the most recognizable, the most famous, the richest, or number one in the rankings.
yes, but it's enough to feel satisfied with what you do. And I think that in our school, that's exactly what we learn. We learn to overcome difficulties and, most importantly, to overcome ourselves.
How is the school itself funded? Does it receive money from institutions apart from the NGO you mentioned, where you said it's not really...
The people who have already graduated from the school are the ones who contribute money to the NGO. Usually, we use these funds for trips when the children need to go to competitions. At such times, the school where they study doesn't always have the necessary funds. Some schools where only 1 or 2 children are studying can provide funding relatively easily. However, when a school needs to send 24 children and the participation fee for each is 300 leva, then things become much more serious, and it's just not possible. So usually these trips have to be paid for. And that's exactly why we've established the association School A and B, so we can accept donations from former competitors who want to support the development of the new ones. But we can't use these donations to fund the school's operations. The school's work is funded solely by fees. And as we already calculated last year, also from my pension,
Still, if someone wants to support and hasn't been part of the school but feels connected to your mission, since this channel is mainly educational, everything that the channel stands for is to educate people in certain directions. Maybe you haven't had time to watch the different videos. There are already several hundred of them, but the people who come here usually have some kind of cause, some kind of mission. Whether they're helping children, building facilities for kids, producing healthy food, or running a business that helps people, that's the point. So if someone sees meaning in supporting you or helping with the upcoming international competition in Shumen, which I want to reiterate, we will all be volunteers, the entire team. A few people will come from Sliven, from Straudza, from wherever they're from. So maybe it will be interesting. We'll leave the first link in the video description. We'll write down the account. We'll also include the school's website. And of course, anyone who wants to can get in touch with you as well. If they wish.
yes,
If they actually want their children to come and get a bit of training.
of course, getting in touch with me is very easy. Just type Biserka Yovcheva into Google. If you want to be more specific, add phone and email to your search so that you get exactly that information, because otherwise a lot will come up. So contacting me is the easiest way. But otherwise, specifically regarding this support, as I mentioned, a few years ago, we established the association School A and B so that all donations could go directly to the association. There is a big difference between the teaching at the school and the work of the association. The association exists to help, to support the children in their activities. Sometimes, if necessary, and a child cannot afford to go to a competition, we can simply support them from the association's funds. At the moment, it is empty because last month, in April, we organized the international competition Yeti, and absolutely all the money from the account went there. And yes, I hope it will start to fill up again soon, because from time to time, my former students remember and transfer a little money and, drop by drop. One of the things we always do is in 2 days, we will have the end of year ceremony. A tradition has emerged here with us. Everyone who leaves the school receives a small plaque with the school's logo. And on the plaque, it says, "Don't forget with which frogs and in which pond you have croaked." And yes, everyone leaves with this little plaque and carries it with them close to their heart wherever they go. They've even told me that one of the things they enjoy most is when they start at a new office, at a new job, they put the plaque on their desk. And for them, it's a point of pride that they came from the school.
Thank you very much for being our guest again. I'll reserve the right, since you live in Shumen. As we established earlier, I will most likely continue living in Shumen. I hope you'll come again so we can talk a bit about education as a topic and also about some other subjects related to your mission.
With pleasure.